Hello and welcome. Let's talk about Disney Lorcana Set 5, Shimmering Skies. All the cards from this exciting new expansion have been revealed, and honestly this might be the most exciting Lorcana set since Set 1. And I'm not just saying that. Other than maybe Into the Inklands, introducing locations, it really seems like Shimmering Skies has the most potential to shake up the game with some powerful new cards. And it's already begun doing so right now at the beginning of the set. Of course, we all knew Set 5 would come in and complement some strong existing Set 4 decks, but I already see potential for exciting brand new decks this set, which is always welcome. In today's video, I want to take a look at some of the most exciting cards in Shimmering Skies. Keep in mind, these are early impressions of the set, and some things could end up being off as things settle, but based on what I've seen and my experience so far, I feel I have a good grasp of Shimmering Skies going in. So today, let's look at what I believe are the top 10 cards in Lorcana Shimmering Skies. Before we get to the top 10, let me quickly run through a bunch of other highlights from the set. All of these honorable mentions are vital cards to keep in mind, and many of these cards just barely missed out on my top 10. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to start with Amber and then move my way through each color all the way to Steel. Let's look at some honorable mentions that could easily contest for a top 10 spot. To kick things off, we have Alanadale, Rockin' Rooster. This was one of the first cards of Shimmering Skies that really got me excited to begin deck building. He's a new source of lore in Amber, as Alan provides one lore whenever you play a song. I like the idea of that, and we've already seen some non-flute song-based lore decks emerging recently with the Golden Harp. Alanadale provides even more of this playstyle in Amber, and I think he has potential not only in a Steel song deck, but in other colors as well, such as Emerald or Ruby. With that said, this rooster is a 4-cost character, and if you've played Lorcana, you'd know that the 4-cost slot is one of the most contested spots in a deck, and that's true across all colors. Add in the fact that Alan gets overshadowed by another song-based Amber 4-cost character this set, and it's hard to see him as a new staple. But I do think he has to be mentioned because of his potential to pop off and end a game suddenly if used properly. Now let's talk about another 4-cost Amber character. I know I just said they have to be great to be considered, but Sven Reindeer Steed is another interesting character that deserves a mention, as he can be great in certain decks. He's essentially a 4-cost LeFou instigator in Amber because he readies a chosen character when you play him. This time around, that chosen character can't challenge after they ready up, but they are turned in order to keep them safe. I suppose they could also sing a song after being readied, which is relevant in Amber, but the primary use is definitely for protection, particularly inside of an aggro deck. Between Sven and all the bodyguards in Amber protecting an aggressive character like Lilo or the new Daisy Duck, it's easier than ever to run an aggressive list. And you'll see this as we continue. Aggro decks really are making themselves known as a true force in Set 5. Next up is Fix-It Felix Jr., Niceland's Steward. I think Felix is an overlooked card, but I do get it because I'm honestly not sure how good this card is just yet. Felix is here to beef up locations, giving each location you have an additional 2 willpower, which sort of sounds amazing if played at the right time, alongside something like Queen's Castle or McDuck Manor. With Felix buffing up locations, your opponent is going to have a problem on their hands unless they have hard removal for locations. Now if they do have that, then yes, this card does feel pretty bad, but Felix does have some good stats though as a 4/5. And I'm excited to see what sort of location decks I can cook up with this card very soon. Sticking with the same IP here, Wreck-It Ralph Captain Underpants is another interesting Amber character. He has the ability to draw a character into your hand from your discard when you play him, just like Amber Hades from Set 1. That's always a great ability to have, and as a bonus, if you choose a princess character, you gain 2 lore. There are numerous ways to utilize this alongside many different princess cards. The question is that 2 lore gain plus his great stats enough to justify the uninkable 7-cost price tag? I think the answer to that is often yes, especially in a mid-range style Amber deck. And that's even when comparing him against another 7-cost card like Surfer Stitch. For even more lore-gaining princess synergy in Amber, Look no further than the Queen's Censer Core. This item gains 1 lore at the beginning of each turn where you have a queen or princess on board. I think this is an item worth building around, and I think there will be at least a few successful moments of Censer Core decks popping up this set. After all, it encourages such a fun archetype that I think players have been wanting for a long time. There are just so many queens and princesses at this point that it's fairly easy to craft a strong deck around Queen's Censer Core, and if you fully commit to the theme, this also becomes a decent card draw item. And it does all this while still being inkable if it's better used that way. Finally, let's talk about a new Amber song, Blast from Your Past. Play or sing this 6-cost song and you get to play the name game. Name a card and return all characters with that name from your discard to your hand. Because of characters like Stitch, the Queen, Merlin, or Robin Hood, there are ways to make this card have a huge impact. I suppose this also has hilarious potential with Dalmatian puppies, but that's not going to be enough to get it mentioned here. This is another card that I've decided to include because I can't overlook its potential. Compare it to another Amber song, Part of Your World. That's a 3-cost song that returns a character to your hand from your discard. For double the price, you can get 3 or 4 times the value with this song. Plus, as a 6-cost song, it combos nicely with a couple new characters, like Prince Naveen and Robin Hood Sharpshooter. I do think it's hard to run multiple copies of this card because it can brick in a few ways, like having no characters discarded or simply not the right type or amount of characters in the discard, but I still want to mention it here as a card to really keep an eye on. Moving on to Amethyst cards, let's talk about everyone's favorite Ice Queen, Elsa the Fifth Spirit. Elsa is back once again, and this is one of the better Elsa cards introduced so far. She's an inkable rush plus evasive character with 2 strength, so that alone is always going to be pretty nice. 5 ink cost is a bit slow against the early evasive or aggro threats that Elsa wants to take down, and additionally having only 1 lore does feel pretty bad. However, that's where all the negatives end, because Elsa also has the ability to exert a chosen opposing character when she hits the board. This is a very nice addition that gives her some immediate impact and allows her to expand her reactive defense further, taking down smaller aggressive threats before they can even quest. Having another strong Elsa in the game also means that Elsa Spirit of Winter is enabled a bit more than usual going into set 5, and that's something I'll always be excited for. Next we have Madam Mim Elephant, who joins the duo of Snake and Fox to complete the Mim Bounce Trio. Sorry Mim Dragon, I guess you're in a different category on your own. Now, as I was saying earlier about Sven, it's going to be difficult to fit a 4-cost character into many decks, and Amethyst is perhaps the most difficult when it comes to that challenge. After all, Amethyst has its famous Merlin rabbits and goats that already provide incredible value at the 4-cost slot. Because of that, I've heard a lot of negativity about Mim Elephant, but I don't agree. Objectively, this card is incredibly strong. She's inkable and has incredible stats for a 4-cost character. In particular, this card is great at pressuring steel decks and ruby decks. Usually those colors have no problem dealing with characters on board, but that 7 willpower makes Elephant expensive to remove, as both steel actions and Ruby's Maui need to hit twice to take her down. Yes, Elephant is vulnerable to Medusa, but most cards are, and if you want to Medusa my Elephant, I think I've already won that trade. Now this is a Madam Mim, so her character bounce effect is a classic addition, and as always, it can be used in various ways, both offensively and defensively. Unless you're crafting a deck that's super low to the ground aggressive, I suspect many Amethyst decks are going to want to find a way to fit at least 2 of these elephants into their bounce packages. Next up, we have Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom. This is a very simple action. Spend 2 ink, gain 2 lore. And despite that simplicity, it seems like the community doesn't really know what to do with this card just yet. Does it belong in a hyper aggro deck that can simply slam these down to rush up the lore? Or does it belong in a more control style deck that can combo into it later on and finish out the game? As of right now, it's picking up steam in aggro decks, as Amethyst has the power to quickly rack up double-digit lore, then switch gears using card draw to hunt these down, gathering all the knowledge and lore to finish out games. This action falls short of my top 10 because although it is very strong right now, I'm worried it may fall out of favor, but I could be way off with that prediction. It does have such natural potential in a color like Amethyst that already has a lot of explosive lore gaining cards. Plus, like I said, Amethyst is equipped with the card draw necessary to draw past these gathering actions until you need them. Finally, let's cap off the Amethyst honorable mentions with the Library, a gift for Belle. This location is a mini Queen's Castle. It's an inkable location with solid willpower, lore each turn, and a decent ability as a bonus. If there's ever a meta that demands 4 castles, the Library is likely to follow suit as a turn 3 option leading up to that castle. Or better yet, the Library functions as a later option, enabling combo lines with 2 libraries dropped at 6 ink, or 1 library plus 1 castle slammed down for 7 ink. You can also play a Be Prepared plus a library for only 10 ink, which can be super difficult for certain decks to answer. This is very similar to the very successful 11 ink Be Prep into Castle combo from set 4. Not much else to say here, this is likely the strongest location in Shimmering Skies. Now let's take a look at Emerald cards, starting with Anna, Diplomatic Queen. This is an Emerald legendary card that leans into flexibility as a strength. After spending 3 ink to play Anna, you can spend 2 more ink to activate one of her 3 abilities. You can either make an opponent discard a card from hand, give a chosen character +2 strength, or banish a chosen damaged character. This flexibility is nice, and if it wasn't for the somewhat steep cost, Anna might find herself immediately in the top 10. Because of that 3 + 2 ink cost, Anna will almost always be played after 5 ink. In a way, she sort of has a 4th flexible ability, which is to play her early for the lore threat, but most of the time she's effectively a 5 cost uninkable character. And that means she has to be excellent to be considered for an Emerald deck, which already has its fair share of strong uninkables. As you might expect, Anna's most impactful ability is the banish on a damaged character. In the right deck, this alone is enough to make her a big threat. If there arises a consistent way to make use of that, such as by pinging damage out on characters, I expect to see Anna being played all the time. This inherently makes her a natural partner for steel decks, following the lead of other Emerald characters like Beast Relentless or Cheshire Cat. Up next, we have Mother Gothel, Unwavering Schemer. This is a 6-cost Mother Gothel that's been introduced alongside the smaller 2-cost Gothel Conceited Manipulator. Both Mother Gothels are here to bounce opponent characters back into their hand. Immediately, I think of Genie on the Job from set 1. He's evasive and lets you choose any character, but Gothel trades that for an extra point in strength. And even though the opponent gets to choose the character that's bounced, her bounce effect gets a round ward, which definitely can come in handy. Plus, her ability to shift into play is another great bonus. As for Emerald actions, You're Welcome is a new 4-cost inkable song that also helps with removal. On the surface, this card is just simply a great addition to Emerald. It provides hard removal across all card types, with the drawback of your opponent drawing 2 cards. This is reminiscent of the Amethyst Floodborn Yzma, except You're Welcome can also hit items and locations. That card draw as consolation can feel pretty bad, but let's be honest, it's an insanely impactful effect on a singable, inkable card. And don't forget, you can also use this action on one of your own cards if needed to draw 2 cards yourself. That's a lot of value packed into one card. What can I say? Except you're welcome. Let's wrap up Emerald now with Prince John's Mirror. Yeah, this one is fun, I guess. Prince John's Mirror is a 3-cost inkable item that locks your opponent at a 3-card hand size at the end of each turn. This card is going to lead to some very negative experiences on both sides. In some matchups, it's probably the best card to play on turn 3, and it's going to shatter the opponent's game plan. And then at other times, it's going to feel a bit useless. Plus, having multiple Prince John mirrors on board does almost nothing unless you're playing some weird item-focused Emerald deck. Now the good news, if you're playing this, is that this card is inkable, so it's simply ink when undesired. I think Prince John's Mirror is at least a decent card with a chance of being very oppressive in the meta if left unchecked. And overall, I'm not too excited about it because of how bad it feels to play against. Coming up next is Ruby, and sadly there aren't many Ruby cards that impress me this set. And that's disappointing for me because Ruby is one of my favorite ink colors, and it's probably my most played ink color competitively. Across Ruby characters, actions, items, and locations from Shimmering Skies, nothing really stands out. I think it's possible that something will rise up and surprise us, but for now, even the legendary cards of the set feel underwhelming. Out of the two, the most interesting is definitely Robin Hood Sharpshooter. Whenever this Robin quests, you scout 4 cards deep off the top of your deck, and can play a single 6 cost or less action for free. The rest are discarded. This ability has a lot of things you can do with it, but the choice to put this on his quest rather than when he's played does hold him back. I get that this can be crazy if he sticks on board and can use his power more than once, but Lorcana is all about immediate payoff, and Robin Hood falls short by that criteria. I still like this card though, more than probably any other Ruby character this set, and he does feel like a unique legendary card to have. I'm gonna build more with him for sure, and really try to find a way to capitalize on his strengths. Another Ruby character worth mentioning is Vanellope von Schweet's Random Roster Racer. Ruby Vanellope has some potential as a great tech card. She's a 3/3 with Rush, plus evasive on the first turn you play her, so this means she's a natural response to evasive threats. As a 4-cost character, she works nicely alongside Sapphire, hitting the board on turn 3 after turn 2 ramp. You'll just need to find a way to fit her into a deck that's already brimming with uninkables. Finally, one of the best Ruby cards of the set is the 1-cost item Ruby Chromacon. Yes, this item is very basic and not all too impressive at a glance, but it's a 1-cost inkable item that can be used turn after turn as needed. Other than item fodder paired with Sapphire, it provides some fantastic anti-aggro and anti-location capabilities to Ruby. Namely, it can bump Grandma Tala up to 4 to hit Daisy and Sisu, and it can bump Maui up to 7 strength to deal with Queen's Castle. We'll have to see if these specific use cases are prevalent enough for Ruby Chromacon to become a new mainstay in Ruby Sapphire item decks, or perhaps even a Ruby deck outside of Sapphire. For now, I have no problem mentioning it here as a strong new item to keep an eye on. Alright, next let's get into some Sapphire cards, starting with Merlin Intellectual Visionary. Merlin is a hard one to nail down, and I'm not even sure he belongs on this list, but it's hard to imagine he doesn't land somewhere among the top cards of the set. He's too powerful not to, even if he takes a bit of effort to set up. Merlin allows you to search your deck for any card so long as you shift him into play. Naturally, he is held back by a lack of great shift targets, but the idea here is to shift Merlin in and find a card you desperately need in the current game state. A lot of the time, this means picking a strong song for Merlin to sing. After all, if you shift him into play, unless you played the first Merlin on the same turn, then this Merlin is ready to go and you can sing the song right away. Interestingly, you can compare Merlin to Naveen, who can play any 6-cost song when he's played. Merlin does this too when shifted in on top of a previously played Merlin, and you even get to search for the song you want to play when you play him. So instead of needing the song already in your hand with Naveen, you just need the shift target on board for Merlin. Now, funny enough, Merlin is actually somewhat held back by being a 6-cost character and not higher. If he were 7-cost or even 8 or 10 cost, he could sing things like Be Prepared, or even Dig a Little Deeper, or Second Star to the Right. Now those sing together songs are still pretty interesting cards to use with him. The main issue with Merlin is that his only great shift targets are those in Amethyst. And even then, it kind of feels bad to shift him onto a rabbit or goat who want to be bounced back to hand or banished in their base form. I suppose you could bounce the stack of 2 or more Merlins back into your hand, so that's pretty interesting. But as of right now, in the opening aggro meta of set 5, Merlin is basically an awkward card that has great potential and yet is just out of reach of that potential. I think he's going to take some time and perhaps another set or 2 before he makes a huge impact. But that doesn't mean I haven't already started cooking with Merlin, no doubt about that. Another exciting Sapphire character is Sheriff of Nottingham, Bushel Britches. This is a 9-cost character with insane stats. 5/9 plus he quests for 4 lore. He also gets a cost reduction for every item you have in play. Combine that with Ink Ramp and Sapphire, and Sheriff of Nottingham can be played out way earlier than you'd expect. Some decks get out items really quick, so Sheriff of Nottingham can end up like a 4-cost 5/9 with 4 lore. Plus he also even has support as a bonus keyword. I guess why not? Now let's talk about a Sapphire action that I'm very excited to build with. This is Vision of the Future. Vision of the Future is a very underrated card. Essentially, this is an upgraded version of Develop Your Brain that costs 1 more ink. Instead of drawing 2 cards and picking 1, you draw 5 cards and pick 1. This can be very good, allowing you to dig for exactly what you need, especially later in the game. I really think this card is going to absolutely thrive in slower metas, or whenever control decks are in favor. On the contrary, against hyper aggro decks, this does feel a bit unplayable though, because you're playing this instead of a different card early on that can answer the aggressive characters. Don't count out Vision of the Future completely though, I do think it's being slept on. Moving on to steel cards now, Doc Bold Knight is a really fun new character, and likely the best of the new 7 Dwarf Knights. Doc is a special card that can be built around inside a deck that aims to empty their hand quickly. Then he can be played to draw you 2 cards without much consequence. It's gonna take a specific playstyle to make Doc work, but he's a super interesting character to consider building around, and I think he deserves some attention. Another new character worth discussing is Hey Hey Protective Rooster. This is a super simple card that gets a nod because of his great stats. Hey Hey is a 4 strength, 5 willpower character for 5 ink, and since he's inkable, quests for 2 lore, and has bodyguard, he deserves some love. There are already a ton of good 5-cost characters, but if you need a bodyguard on turn 5 in a steel deck, Hey Hey's got your back. Finally, let's take a look at a new steel song that's being severely overlooked. When Will My Life Begin is a new 3-cost steel song. Right away, that should spark some curiosity based on the prevalence of our other 3-cost steel songs, Let the Storm Rage On and Strength of a Raging Fire. Now those 2 are definitely powerful songs because of their ability to throw out damage early, but When Will My Life Begin can also be sung by an early Cinderella or other singer, and it draws you a card just like Storm, while being inkable just like Strength. When Will My Life Begin will also prevent a chosen opposing character from challenging. This is great for supporting an aggro deck. Imagine a Daisy or 2 or even a Golden Harp on board, threatening to quest for a ton of lore. Your opponent has spent time setting up a character to deal with them, and now they're hit with this song, stopping their challenge, protecting your character, and you even get to draw a card. I think this song is being overlooked at first because it isn't very flashy, but I know better than to overlook a steel song. Plus, When Will My Life Begin's ability to activate flutes, harp, and now Alanadale, along with generally supporting the aggro game plan, can't be ignored. Alright, well that was a lot of content for all the non-top 10 cards, so let's actually talk about some good cards for once. I'll start out my top 10 with an exciting new card, Monster Reborn. Sorry, I meant to say Reanimate. Oh wait, no, sorry, I actually meant to say, for real this time, Revive. Revive is a 5-cost uninkable amber action that allows you to play a 5-cost character out onto the board straight from your discard. Revive squeaks its way into the top 10 because although it is a 5-cost non-song uninkable action, which is a very hefty price, the potential reward for that price can be incredible. Returning a key character to the board is powerful. 4 revives can, in theory, feel like running 8 copies of a character. But the real value is that it allows you to have a much higher percentage of playing a particular character twice, even if you only end up drawing into 1 of your 4 copies. I think it's better to think of Revive in that way, rather than thinking of it as a 6th through 8th copy of a card. Plus, if there's multiple valuable characters you may want to revive, it does give you that nice flexibility. The major downside here is that it can often be better to just draw a new playable character rather than draw your revive. And this is mainly because in order to use revive, you do need to have a character already discarded or banished to use it on. We do have some examples to compare this to though. One of my favorite cards in all of Lorcana is Hades, Lord of the Underworld. He's had some formats where he's really thrived and others where he hasn't been played at all. But like I discussed earlier when talking about Underpants Ralph, this type of recursion effect is always going to come back around and be vital for certain decks at certain times. Having this ability not attached to a body like Hades or Ralph can feel lackluster, but remember that Revive also plays out the chosen character immediately when the action is played. There's not really much else to say here, so let me just quickly fire off some solid characters that are great to use Revive on. Keep in mind that the majority of these characters are chosen because of their when played abilities. So in a way, you can think of Revive as a way to utilize those enter the battlefield abilities a second time. Natively inside of Amber, Revive works great with Ariel, Rapunzel, Naveen, Kida, Mufasa, and more. Across other ink colors, there are numerous characters to revive, such as Rabbit, Goat, Elsa, Cricky, Lucifer, Anna, Cusco, Jim Hawkins, Maui, Flaversham, Grammatala, Belle, Cogsworth, Angry Beast, Sad Beast, definitely not this beast, Referee Pete, and more. Next up at number 9 we have Tipo, Growing Sun. Tipo is a 2-cost inkable Storyborn ally with 1 strength, 2 willpower, and 1 lore. When you play Tipo, you may put a character from your hand into your inkwell face down and exerted. When I first saw this card, I was convinced it was a top 3 card in the set. To me, the ability to ramp on turn 2 in Sapphire has proven to be so powerful thanks to 1 jump ahead that the idea of an additional way to reliably ink twice on turn 2 was just way too good to pass up. I still think this card is very good and definitely deserving of a spot here in the top 10. After some early proxy playtesting, I have found that inking from your hand rather than the top of your deck, unsurprisingly, can sometimes lead to issues in the mid-game. If you compare Tipo to Detective Mickey, who similarly inks a card when he's played, Tipo's not so hidden additional cost of committing 2 cards in the hand to work is a negative. Tipo does crucially come into play 1 turn earlier than Mickey though, and this distinction is important because some decks are really going to want Tipo and others are really going to want Mickey. In general, right now is not a great meta for playing a card like Tipo or Mickey on turns 2 or 3, thanks to all the aggro running amok. Unless you can guarantee that early ramp immediately leads to some hard removal, you can find yourself in a difficult position. That being said, I still value Tipo a lot more than other players, and I think he truly is a new staple for Sapphire decks moving forward. The ability to run 8 turn 2 ramp cards in your deck for consistency feels great. I've played a ton of Sapphire over the last few sets, and one of the only things I dislike about certain lists is their dependence on 1 jump ahead on turn 2. This specific reliance makes those decks feel inconsistent by nature. Tipo isn't the perfect fix for the issue, but he's pretty darn close. Now there are certainly some Sapphire decks that don't want or need that ramp component, but just like before in every other set, I suspect the best Sapphire decks and vast majority of lists in Shimmering Skies will lean into that ink ramp identity of the color. And Tipo is simply a brand new component for those ramp engines. As I was saying, in the early set 5 meta, there's a lot of aggro, which does sour the idea of Tipo some. He's a setup card, not a reactive or defensive card, but early format aggro hype has always been a thing. It always tends to die down or begin facing meta answers as they emerge. And that's when slower enabling cards like Tipo really begin to shine. Sapphire Steel and Ruby Sapphire are the obvious choices to include Tipo in, but he's also going to work nicely in Amethyst, who can bounce him back to hand for another use, since his ability kicks in when he's played. Detective Mickey has always worked well paired with Amethyst for the same reason. but Tipo coming out on turn 2 has some major benefits. He works better than Mickey in many sequences, such as allowing a follow-up Fox on the next turn, bouncing him back and preparing to rush into battle. Merlin Crab can similarly hit the board on 3 and allow Tipo to challenge with 4 strength. In either of these lines, you have 4 strength ready to slam into Daisy Duck or Sisu if you're on the draw. Yes, Tipo does require you to ink a card from your hand, but having him as a body on board compared to 1 jump ahead can sometimes make a big difference. I doubt he'll ever be a full replacement for 1 jump ahead, but his potential to combo with other colors is super important. Next up, we have another Sapphire character here at number 8, Mufasa, Ruler of Pride Rock. Mufasa is an 8-cost uninkable character. He's a Storyborn, Mentor, and King with 4 strength, 9 willpower, and he quests for 4 lore. What a beast. Mufasa also introduces some brand new Inkwell interaction with his abilities. First of all, Mufasa costs at least 8 ink, but when you play him, you must exert all cards in your Inkwell. Then you return 2 cards at random from the Inkwell to your hand. That already is pretty strong, as Mufasa essentially draws you 2 cards when he's played. And although this does decrease your ink pool size, you have a chance to find a previously inked card, which could come in handy. As a second ability, whenever Mufasa quests, you ready every card in your Inkwell. In other words, if Mufasa survives until the turn after he's played, which is pretty likely without a strong response, he sort of allows you to take an extra turn. You can spend all your ink, as you normally would, playing cards as usual, and then quest with Mufasa for 4 lore, resetting your Inkwell, which is now ready to be used again. You don't actually get another turn, as you don't draw or get any additional end of turn or beginning of turn triggers, but you do get to use all your ink all over again on the same turn. I don't think I need to explain how crazy that is. I really like this new Mufasa card, and thematically he feels like a card that deserves to be a legendary. He's very strong and scary when you see him across the table, and he has a very unique ability that also feels like it has such a high ceiling of potential. Even in the worst case scenario, as long as you get to 8 ink, you play him out and get 2 cards back right away. This immediately leads me to compare Mufasa to Surfer Stitch. Yes, Mufasa costs more, but he's in Sapphire and provides 2 more lore. Yes, Mufasa is uninkable, but again, he's in Sapphire and has 2 more lore. High costs and uninkability don't feel as bad in blue. In addition to solid raw stats, Mufasa has a lot going on, and he can enable numerous lines on the follow-up turn. What an awesome new card. Up next at number 7 is my highest ranked item of Lorcana Set 5. This is the Amethyst Chromacon. This is a 2-cost inkable item that can be exerted each turn to activate Amethyst Light, which allows each player to draw a card. Very simple and very effective. Cheap turn after turn card draw is very good, and cheap items in general are also good in Lorcana. And all this comes inside an inkable package, which is great. If you were around in set 1 and remember the Magic Mirror days, you'll likely see right away how this item has potential to become a new staple in Amethyst. This item is better though, with its low cost plus no additional cost to use each turn. This card finds a home in many different decks, from aggro to control. And I'm curious to see if the item aspect will enable it even more. I'm already diving into some Amethyst Sapphire Blurple deck ideas that could see this card paired with Flaversham. I don't see why not. Plus, Amethyst Chromacon is already excelling at providing easy card draw for aggro decks, like Amber Amethyst and Amethyst Emerald. Many lists already have this as a 4 of in these decks. The major drawback, as you may have already guessed, is that this card does allow your opponent to draw alongside you. That can be strong for your opponent, but remember, this card is still under your control, and you can choose when to utilize it. In a control deck, it's there as a consistent tool if you need it, helping you get to everything you want to see in the late game. In an aggro list, Amethyst Chromacon is simply refueling your tank of threats each turn for free. It doesn't matter if your opponent draws half their deck if you can get to 18 lore and then use Chromacon to find your Merlin Goat. I think the major question for me is whether this card best serves as a replacement for or addition to Friends on the Other Side. Overall, I'm excited to continue building with this item, as I'm sure it'll remain an Amethyst staple throughout Shimmering Skies. Next up, we have a fan favorite character, Kuzco. This is Kuzco, Selfish Emperor. Kuzco is a 6-cost inkable sapphire character with 3 strength, 5 willpower, and 2 lore. This Storyborn King has 2 abilities. Outplacement reads, when you play this character, you may put a chosen item or location into its player's inkwell face down and exerted. He also has invite only. You may spend 4 ink to grant each other character of yours +1 resist until the start of your next turn. Now this second ability is interesting and can certainly be useful, but it alone isn't enough to boost Kuzco up into the top 10. Although I do want to acknowledge that you can use this power multiple times per turn so long as you pay for its cost, which is pretty neat and is likely the reason why the cost is so high in the first place. However, as you may expect, Kuzco is here because of that first ability. Outplacement lets you ink an item or location from either side of the board. Right away, as many have determined, this card is going to fill the role of cards like Rise of the Titan, Hard-Headed Beast, Benja, and especially Judy Hopps. Kuzco provides this flexible item plus location removal in a nice package, tacked onto an inkable character who can remove those pesky cards upon entering play. I'll be covering another very similar card soon, and the reason why these cards made it on the list is they provide some very powerful targeted removal that will immediately shift the meta away from some of its previous dominance. Strong locations like Queen's Castle or McDuck Manor are gone when you play Kuzco, and a valuable game-ending item like Lucky Dime becomes ink when Kuzco is played, and that is so critical. I can't stress enough just how much better that is than hitting Dime with Judy or a steel item remover. With Dime banished to the shadow realm of the inkwell, those pesky Tamatoas can't simply grab them back from the discard. In the past, you could stall a Dime deck's progress, but now, unless they get lucky with Blue Fossa, you can block them out of Dime completely. The best part is Kuzco is inkable, which is the cherry on top, making him the perfect tech card that can become ink whenever he's not needed. As always, I should mention that Kuzco's outplacement is a when-played ability, so bounce effects across colors come into play as well for added value. At the end of the day, there's nothing bad about this card. He even sports 2 lore as a bonus. He really has it all. A selfish emperor indeed. We don't have to go far to get our next card though. A lot of what I just said applies to my number 5 card, Hideaway. Hideaway is an inkable 2-cost sapphire action that will sound familiar. When you play it, you place a chosen item or location into its player's inkwell face down and exerted. Sweet and simple. Just like Kuzco, who we just covered, this is another new tool for Sapphire to deal with items and locations. This card is picking up some traction and starting to get noticed, but I still think it's very overlooked, especially compared to Kuzco, even though they accomplish the same task. Hideaway helps fight back against items and locations, just like Rise of the Titans, like I said before. However, by comparison, Hideaway costs 1 less ink, but inks the card it banishes. That seems like a nice, balanced way to trade off strength, but as discussed, throwing a dime into the opponent's inkwell is a huge silver lining that comes alongside that would-be negative. Now, all that alone is still not enough to push this card into the top 5 cards of the set. After all, Kuzco costs a bit more, but he attaches all this to a character on the table. So why do I rank Hideaway above him? Well, just like Kuzco, this card can target your own items and locations, throwing them into your own inkwell. And you can do this starting on turn 2. This means Hideaway can also act as a self-ramp effect, so long as you're okay with inking your own cards, usually a cheap item played on turn 1. Let me clarify, I think this card has the specific potential to function as 4 additional inkable copies of One Jump Ahead in a Steel or Ruby ramp deck. With 8 or so 1-cost items, you can consistently play this on turn 2 after a turn 1 item, just like One Jump Ahead, to get your ideal opening rolling. Now this still is a plan B sequence since you'd rather play one jump into a turn 3 Hiram if you have that item played on turn 1, but sometimes you don't have Hiram and you don't have one jump, but you do have a Fortisphere and a Grammatala. Well, in that scenario, Hideaway is here to help, and it vastly increases the consistency of your openings. Now let me take a step back. Maybe I'm overvaluing this action and tunnel visioning a bit into this fairly specific use case. I am willing to admit that, and I still own my high ranking even if it doesn't work out. But so far I have been really liking Hideaway in my bit of playtesting. Let me know what you guys think about this one making it into my top 5. Let's continue on and check out number 4 on the list. This is Cogsworth, a Luminary Watchman. Cogsworth is an inkable, 1-cost character, and he's my highest ranked Amethyst card of Shimmering Skies, landing up here in the top 5 cards of the set. And that's not because Cogsworth has anything super flashy going on, he's a very simple card. Instead, he gets picked because of his ability to enable important lines. Cogsworth is a Dreamborn ally with a single point of strength, willpower, and lore. When he's played, you choose a character and give them Rush this turn. Cogsworth, being a clock and all, revitalizes a bit of the set 1 flavor of White Rabbit's Pocket Watch. Giving Rush to a character, especially for only a cost of 1 ink, is very powerful. Even beyond the super dramatic synergy with the challenge-based lore characters like Aladdin, Robin Hood, Shere Khan, and more, the simple impact from rushing in a character like Merlin Goat or Merlin Crab can't be overstated. Right now, as we've been discussing, aggro is king, and if that continues to be the case moving into the opening weeks of set 5, Cogsworth is a great tool to fight back. The duo of Cogsworth and Merlin Crab alone are incredible for challenging such threats. If Cogsworth existed in another color, he'd still be good, but in Amethyst, the lines appear so naturally. He reminds me of Pinocchio Talkative Puppet, the way he comes out at a cheap cost and can easily be bounced back to hand, ready for his ability to be used again, even multiple times on the same turn if needed. Remember, he only costs 1 ink, and he grants one of the top keywords in all of Lorcana for that price. Since Cogsworth only costs 1 and is inkable, he can fit into a list easily without too much of a drawback, even if he isn't needed for a particular matchup. It should be mentioned that you can also use Cogsworth, a Luminary Watchman, as a shift target for Cogsworth Grandfather Clock, which is pretty neat. That said, in almost every scenario, I don't like the idea of playing Cogsworth Watchman on turn 1, and usually not on turn 2 either, unless I'm rushing in a second 1-cost character. The point is, I don't see him as a consistent shift target for an early Floodborn Cogsworth. He certainly could work later in the game. For example, you can play Watchman Cogsworth out, give Rush to himself, and then shift Grandfather Clock on top for 3 ink, and rush in with 2 strength. That's pretty interesting, but probably a fringe scenario. Instead, as I was saying, small Cogsworth brings value by comboing with a number of other Amethyst cards, and I think as time goes on, his creative use is only going to grow. I foresee him being a go-to option that's considered for many decks going forward. Alright, it's time to break into the top 3 cards of set 5, starting with Prince Naveen, Ukulele Player. Naveen is an uninkable 4-cost Amber character, a Storyborn hero prince with 3 strength, 3 willpower, and 2 lore. Naveen really is the encore of all the great Amber cards we've seen in this set, and he's certainly the most hyped legendary card of Shimmering Skies. And here's why. Naveen has Singer 6, which is solid on a 4-cost character, but he also has his beautiful ability, which says, when you play this character, you may play a song with cost 6 or less for free. This is an awesome ability, and although his stats are fine and Singer 6 is great, it's this ability that makes him so dangerous. The fact that you can rush out a bonus song on turn 4 is great, especially since he's a natural follow-up to Ariel on turn 3, who likely just found you a song you can play. Plus, on the next turn, that Singer 6 can kick in if you have more songs ready to go. Obviously, Naveen empowers Amber's Steel even further, with all the classics coming to mind: A Whole New World, Grab Your Swords, and Then Along Came Zeus, as well as smaller steel and amber songs. But across other colors, Naveen can also play out Let It Go, We Don't Talk About Bruno, You're Welcome, A Pirate's Life, Be King Undisputed, and more. A good comparison for Prince Naveen is Jim Hawkins. He was such a hot legendary when he was revealed, since he could cheat out locations right away when he hits the board. And although I'm sure most would agree Jim does have a powerful ability, he has proven to be nowhere near as powerful as initially perceived. This is due to the fact that it does require a second card to combo with in hand, and not only were there few viable locations to combo with, there was, and still isn't, an easy and reliable way to search for locations. Now compare all that to Naveen and his songs. By contrast, you'll find countless strong 6 and under cards to use him with, plus songs can be found quickly with Ariel, perfectly on curve and ready to go. If you have a song card in hand, which can be super likely depending on your deck build, you can swing tempo easily in your favor starting on turn 4 with Naveen. And this can even nullify a lot of the inherent disadvantage of playing from behind going second. And I think that's really one of the unspoken reasons why Naveen provides so much value. I also think other aspects such as his hero and prince traits, plus his ability to contribute Singer 6 towards Sing Together songs starting on turn 5, are more subtle reasons why he brings a lot to the table. I look forward to playing Naveen more, and I'm especially excited to make some off-meta decks with him. It's clear Amber Steel Song loves having him on board, but I have a feeling song-focused Ruby and Emerald decks are going to be a blast this set as well, thanks to Naveen. Next up, we continue further into the top 3 with the number 2 card of the set. I'm sure a lot of you know what the final 2 cards are already. Let's go ahead and get started with that number 2, Pete Games Referee. Pete is a 3-cost inkable steel character, a Dreamborn villain with 3 stats and 1 lore. But his ability Blow the Whistle is why he's my number 2 pick. When you play this character, opponents can't play actions until the start of your next turn. And wow, that is some powerful stuff. Right away when Pete was revealed, a similar character came to mind, Tiana Celebrating Princess. She's another steel character that locks your opponent out of actions, and although her traits, stats, and lore all feel great paired with her resist +2, her action blocking power only kicks in when she's exerted and you have no cards in your hand. Not only does she not work immediately the turn she's played and can't work with cards in your hand, but if your opponent can take her down through a challenge, they can immediately use their actions right away. Compare that to Pete, who whistle blows right when he's played out, and even if he's removed from play next turn with something like Medusa or Hades, his ability persists, and actions can't be played on that following opponent turn. This is game-changing power, as he alone can completely cripple many decks' abilities to deal with characters on board, blocking actions like Be Prepared, Let It Go, and Then Along Came Zeus, and more. Pete also prevents opponents from executing any of their own action-driven game plans, blocking actions like Revive, Hideaway, and A Whole New World. Now yes, Pete's action lockdown does only last 1 turn, but playing Pete is all about timing. In the hands of an experienced player who's well aware of what actions could come down from the opposing deck, Pete is a formidable tool. A strong player with matchup knowledge is going to play Pete at the right time for maximum disruption. And remember, you can run 4 copies of Pete in your deck, and there are always ways to bounce him back to hand or return him from the discard to use again, whether that be from Amethyst bounce effects, Emerald bounce effects, or Amber revival abilities. Now, I'm not saying he's the most optimal target for these types of cards, but it's worth mentioning because I could easily see a meta emerging where multiple Petes are played out each game. That may just become the new normal that players must learn to adapt to. It's that pull towards adaptation and reaction that defines a format's metagame, and I think it appears, at least right now, that Pete is poised to really shake things up in a way that's sure to be remembered. And finally, the number 1 card of Lorcana Shimmering Skies is Daisy Duck Donald's Date. Daisy is a 1-cost uninkable amber character, a Storyborn ally with 1 strength, 4 willpower, and 2 lore. this is an aggro machine, 4 willpower and 2 lore on turn 1. That makes Daisy a huge threat, big enough to impact the entire format. Because of her willpower, it's difficult to remove her before she gains at least 2 lore, if not 4 or even 6 lore in some matchups. This is especially the case when she's combined with cards to support her. Everything from Befuddle and Madam Mim Snake to bodyguards like Kita, Baloo, and Donald Duck all join in to support Daisy. Sven or LeFou can also simply turn her to safety, and the best strategy of all is simply to play out more Daisies as a backup. Now, as a downside to that raw questing power, whenever Daisy does quest, your opponent reveals the top card of their deck and puts it into their hand if it's a character, otherwise it goes to the bottom of their deck. This makes sense as a way to balance her a bit, but she's still an incredibly powerful character. As I said, her 4 willpower is what makes her strong. The jump from 3 to 4 on a 1-cost character is exponentially more impactful than a jump from 2 to 3, which is already very significant, especially during certain metas, where keeping a turn 1 character alive is super important. I've decided to place Daisy here ranked as the best card in the set, simply because she's already a new must-play staple in so many strong decks, and pretty much every other deck is looking for an answer to take her down. Every Amber aggro deck is going to include 4 Daisies without a second thought. It's just an insane card to play on turn 1, or to play 2 of them on turn 2. The high willpower is enough to survive early steal actions like Baboom, Let the Storm Rage On, and even Smash, and even a challenge from strong early characters like Hook, Rafiki, Snake, and Smee won't be able to take down Daisy alone. More often than not, Daisy is going to demand 2 or 3 cards committed to take her down, or at least 1 card stretched across more than 1 turn. And this is after she's already quested at least 1 time. As you can see, Daisy challenges the status quo in an impactful way, especially compared to the previous set 4 meta. Depending on how prevalent aggro decks prove to be over time, her presence is going to continue to inform all deck building choices along the way. I do think that as time goes on, Daisy Duck won't be considered the number 1 card. I think that honor could fall to Pete or Naveen, or another card in the top 10. This is because I trust players will learn and adapt their decks and playstyles to Daisy out of necessity. Many players already have Pete and or Naveen ranked higher than Daisy, but this is a top 10 today on the first week of Shimmering Skies. And as it stands now, right at the beginning of the format, it's clear aggro is going to be a force to reckon with, and Daisy is leading the charge. Daisy Duck Donald's Date is the card of the set that has already begun to set the pace for the entire format, and that's why she's here ranked number 1. Alright, well that's all I have for today. If you liked this video, please take the time to click and give it a thumbs up, and comment down below any card you think I missed, or list off your own top 10 ranking. I honestly would love to read through those. I usually read every comment I receive. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe as well. I promise I'll make that subscription worth it, as I have a ton of content coming. I plan to focus a lot on deck building this set, and I already have a few videos queued up ready to release soon. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.